Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus minisodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive minisode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome back, everybody, to the A World of Difference podcast. We are in a series called Helping in Hard Times, and this is episode 2. My next guest is someone who is also very near and dear to me, and that is my big brother, Dr. Christopher Adams. He is an amazing big brother to start off with, but he's also many other things to a lot of people. And so I wanted to make sure you guys got the treat of being able to hear about his heart and what he's involved with. He is an academic, a musician, a community organizer, an advocate, and just a really great big brother and friend to so many. He is an adjunct professor for the last 12 years at New Mexico State University, and he also is a high school teacher at Las Montañas Charter High School in Las Cruces, New Mexico. He has a PhD in curriculum and instruction. He is fluent in Spanish and English. What else? He currently is with a diversity task force in NMSU College of Education. He is also, of course, a singer and songwriter and guitar player of the band C.M. Adams and the Revelators, because, that's really common to be an academic and a musician in a band. But not only that, he also holds a New Mexico Music Award from 2018 for his song that he wrote and performed with his band. He got Best Americana Song for the song Make My Stand. They were nominated for also Album of the Year as well, and the same year. He is a former regional coordinator for Enlace, where he worked for 10 years, and he'll definitely talk about that in this podcast, so you'll get to hear more about that work. And he's just all around a great guy. I encourage you to check out his album, The Source, which was nominated for Album of the Year, and especially the song Make My Stand. He is both brain and heart, and just uses his hands to help others and his feet to go places where people often don't want to go to help a lot of people. So you are in for a very special treat today. Welcome to the show, Dr. Christopher Adams. Welcome to the show, Chris, my brother, Dr. Christopher Adams. Good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, this is our series where we're talking about how we can help others. And so I definitely wanted to have you on the show today, both as an academic, but also as someone who is a teacher as well. And so there's just going to be a lot to talk about. But why don't you just introduce yourself to us? Let us know kind of who you are and what you do.
Okay. As Lori said, my name is Christopher Adams. I do have the PhD title, but I don't get hung up on titles. But professionally, it's a nice thing to. I earned it,
Right.
um, uh, but if but I'm a teacher professionally, a high school teacher. After been in education over 20 years. Started teaching high school in 1999 as a Spanish teacher, and so here I'm still a teacher. Taught in academia for a few years, or worked at a university. Set up. I taught 4 years, and then I went to work at the university. And I said one day I'd go back, and the door was opened last January, 2019. So I'm just starting my this fall term. I'm a husband, son, and brother. Those are the most dear and personal roles, I think. And I've been a musician since, I guess, I started playing at 8 years old. Somewhat professional, I guess. Currently, I'm also teaching guitar lessons. Gigging is not possible at this point. But it's helped me to get better as a player. But yeah, so we can talk more about that.
That side of teaching is a whole different side of teaching music, which is great. Well, I'm so glad to have you on the show today, because I feel like people can learn a lot, both from what you've learned as an academic, and how that, and you're not just an academic, but you're a practitioner as well, of the things that you've learned, and you've helped a lot of people, both teachers and students. And it's back to school season. It's a really weird back to school season, because people aren't actually physically going back to schools in a lot of cases. I know my kids are going to be online for the entire fall. So I do not consider myself a teacher, and yet I'm having to be one, a teacher, principal, and all those things at the same time. So I know a lot of parents, teachers, students are kind of struggling right now. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I wanted to start kind of at the beginning, which is about your growing up experience. Obviously, I was around for a lot of it, but we all experience growing up, even in the same family and in the same country, in different ways. So I don't know. What was it like to grow up as Chris Adams?
Well, there's phases that I remember in my childhood. The first phase really being before we moved to Venezuela. That was a very innocent time, I guess. In a lot of ways, we lived in a very rural, poor part of the U.S. of Western Kentucky. Our dad was a small rural church pastor. Both of our parents were going to school much during that time. So there was a lot of single parenting going on, I guess if you could say. Dad was gone for almost during the week for a good chunk of that, the last year or two anyway. But it was a happy time. I mean, I guess there were a couple of traumatic experiences when your pillow caught on fire, I guess, and the house filled with smoke, when I broke my arm. And I had a lot of good memories from that place. I think mom and dad would say the same. The real difficult part came when we did move. It was exciting, though, to be able to go to a different country, to become bilingual. The idea of it, as with any move to a new place, it comes with its adjustments. And this came with learning to speak the language and a whole new culture, which, it all did work out for the greater benefit in my life. And now can't imagine having not experienced that. I definitely would not have had the opportunities that I have now. I know that. But, new school, and actually for me, it was changing during middle school, right? And so middle school and kids can be really cruel.
Yes. I have too many scholars. I know that's true.
but those two were, it's just, as far as adolescence and childhood, those are very significant. But I have happy memories of growing up, missing grandparents, I guess, and relatives. I know for that played a huge role as why I chose to go to college close to where my family was. I didn't know anywhere else in the U.S., to be honest, and I didn't want to go alone. So that was a challenge, but at least I was near somebody I was close to.
Because we were all still in Venezuela, and you were coming to the U.S. alone, and so you chose to be around our relatives. They were people you knew.
And, right. In many ways, it felt like coming to a foreign country. Even though I spoke the language, had some cultural capital, there was just a feeling of being an immigrant. Even though I passed in a lot of ways of not being different, at least on the outside, and the language that I spoke, culturally was very difficult at times.
Yeah, that was a real struggle. And being the firstborn in our family, you really had to carry a huge weight. And I see that with a lot of families who are expats raising kids in another country besides their passport country or a country where they're not citizens of. That firstborn that goes back to the passport country, it's really hard to be the first. And so you definitely had to bear the brunt of that in the third culture kid world all alone. So talk about also just the experience of high school. You were in international school and you had friends from, all over the world. What was that experience like? And maybe what are some lessons you had from that time?
Well, as I understand, the class I was joined into had been together since early elementary, and they were really tight. So it was somewhat difficult to fit in. I don't think I really felt like I was belonged until my senior year. Of course, I did my 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade with them, and then we were here in the States for my 11th. But I didn't really feel like, and then also at the same time, I began to really feel like I was Venezuelan that last year. I had anticipated all the years prior, moving back to the States, and, that American dream that they sell you living out of the States was, part of it. But I didn't want to leave when it came down to it.
Yeah.
And we can get into that reasons later. But I just felt like there were people there that I didn't want to leave. And then one of those was my future wife. So.
Yeah, that's so hard because all those years, my perspective on it, and it may have been different for you, was we had this international school that we went to where people were pretty well off and pretty, educated and were from all these countries. And that was very diverse and exciting. But it wasn't diverse economically. It was kind of all one side.
That's true.
Which, there's been a lot in there have been some articles written about that recently as we're talking about, privilege and, some of the racial issues going on. I've seen some things that have been written about growing up in international schools overseas, where there wasn't economic diversity and just the privilege that comes along with that as well. So that's a whole other topic. But I do think for you and I, we grew up in international school, but we also had parents who were working to make a difference in the lives of many who were not as well off in Venezuela, in our city. So we were exposed to kind of two really different worlds. And
contrast.
And so, talk about that experience of these, our church world, the world of where our parents were, where mom was starting a clinic and, all these things. Talk about that.
Yeah. That I'm glad you mentioned that. I guess when in thinking about that, I don't think for me, my friends never made me feel like I was less than in any way, though they were significantly higher up the chain on the socioeconomic scale. I didn't feel that ostracization or that classism, if you will. There was a significant thing when it came to racism little things, that you pick up here and there. But like we had 80 nations present. And so, but it's like, so there was that sort of acceptance, if you will. The many, I don't know if that means 80 languages necessarily. I know Spanish wasn't allowed to be used in class, though we do it. Of course, teachers always thought you were talking about them, right? But when I think about what making a difference meant to me, and of course, you don't think about those intentionally, I guess, as a teenager, because you're so self-absorbed. And I do recall the youth group I belonged to, which was part of the English church there. We went and did some community service things. So there was that instilled. We had two great teachers who were the leaders of that, and they made sure that we got exposed to those who were less privileged. But I guess, as far as the models that we had with, of course, our parents, growing up, having both of them growing up from poverty, and, eventually, we reached middle class, maybe, in some respects. So just watch it. I mean, I didn't observe at the time, but looking back, there were so many valuable lessons, and just the huge accomplishments that they were able to pull off countrywide. And then the fearlessness, I guess, of just going somewhere and being, just like navigating something brand new like that, like the way they did. Driving us in pretty sketchy places, at the time period when, Anglo-European, Americans were kidnapped, frequently. It's just miraculous that didn't happen to us. But I think those things come to my mind when I think about making a difference. The conscious effort to, give and not just like food and whatnot, but provides, healthcare, well-being, treating the physical needs first, and then the spiritual, not tying those two together. I know I've heard of some that do,
right. No, I agree. I experienced some of those same thoughts that you had, the way you're describing it, growing up, just with parents who taught us that life wasn't just to be lived for ourselves, that we're supposed to help others, and in helping others, it often is a risk to you and your family. And they definitely, we were in a situation in Venezuela where it was not, it's certainly not like it is now. It was, back in the 80s and early 90s, it was certainly different.
Using the term American Christianity, I was talking about this with another group of men that I've recently started meeting with, how that was very different than the practices that we saw there.
I agree.
First of all, the Baptist churches don't dance. They do where we went to church, there were certain things you did. They just were not culturally accepted here. But the whole notion of, going to be a missionary and, winning souls, right, and saving lives, I think, that was our intention going into that, from what I recall, as we were preparing. We were very young, but I remember the preparations that Mom and Dad went through, and the grilling they went through, right? But I look back on that, really, it was we who were saved. And not only but from like, very bubble-like places, that we grew up in, we were exposed to so much diversity and um, just differences that we would not have had to get exposed to. So yeah, I feel like we were the ones that were saved
Yeah, I
in
agree.
that.
It just such a great way to grow up. Even the
Mm-hmm.
struggle, I'm just grateful for, because struggle,
Mm-hmm.
can make you better if you allow it. And I feel like
Oh
that's the
yeah.
story for me, for you, for our family.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask this question. So you're definitely a person who wants to make a difference, and it's certainly not a given that when you have parents that are like ours, the children will grow up wanting to also be the kind of people that want to help others and make a difference. But just for you personally, was
Yeah.
there a particular time that you can think of when you were younger at any point, or maybe it was more of a process where you just knew you also wanted to make a difference?
Yeah, I did not want to be in the helping
Uh-huh.
professions
I
or
know.
going on. I mean, if you can, I mean, even with music, I didn't know that that could be a helping
Yeah.
profession. So I definitely see that now. I just know that's the one thing that I knew that I wanted to do. At a point in my life, I needed a job, and that was something I was, okay, I'll do this for a while. I fell in love with it right away.
Yeah.
And to see, and I was my late 30s, um, see how all that I had lived could make sense and could be of some benefit to
Yeah.
somebody. Because coming back to the States and not having or being able to use that cultural capital that was from Venezuela and Latin America, and the linguistic capital not being useful. Now here in New Mexico, it was useful, and
Yeah.
validated. And I didn't feel that move when I moved back to Kentucky.
Yeah.
And it's not that it was intentional on the parts of those people that I, was family with. It's just that's who
Yeah.
they were. They didn't know any
Yeah.
different. And many of those people from other countries and whatnot are suspect.
Yeah.
As somebody different. Um, but when I finally, I mean, teaching, you know, I saw the big possibilities, and when I really knew and figured this is a destiny, this is going to happen, was when I started taking graduate courses. Mind you, I only had my degree was not in teaching. I didn't have a certificate. I got hired on a waiver, so I had to go get courses in education to get my certificate, which I eventually got. Was basically the master's degree, right?
Yeah.
And so my first class was a multicultural education class, with Dr. Chavez, who would become my chair on my dissertation and my mentor, and one of the most trusted friends I've ever known.
Yeah.
And that course showed me stories, and narratives of people who'd grown up like I did with two cultures, two languages, and the feeling of like I had experience of not being validated, not being able to use that cultural capital, which language is so tied to culture to me,
Yeah.
and so not being able to speak that was like, I don't know, part of you were losing all the time. And, you know, so that class, about halfway through that first class of my master's, I realized I'm going to have to get a doctorate in this because it's a way to figure me out. Right? I saw that, but there was so much to not just learn academic sense. Okay, I didn't go in it just for the curiosity academically. To me, it was personal.
Yeah.
And I saw the impacts of education. It exposed to me the inequalities of education and the exclusion of students of color and the underprivileging, basically intrinsic in the system. So that's when I saw, okay, I have I have a mission now.
Yeah.
You know,
And describe that, and describe what you're doing as an educator, as an academic, as a teacher.
well, I'm just trying to be human and trying to help other people be more human. And part of that is the getting your hands dirty with the realities that our kids come in with every day. It's not just robotically trying to dispense content. One of my good, he says, I love his quote. He's like, I teach kids, not content.
That's good.
And I don't know any teacher worth their salt or that would really that excels in this profession without that mindset.
Yeah.
Without that love for the kids, and there's easier ways to make money.
Yeah, for sure.
In the latte work at the class at this school that I would visit once a month or so, they had done for the past several years lots of studies on mental health and mental health with youth, and so they taught me a lot about mental health early on, and kind of put things on my radar and helped me start getting help for myself, actually. So kids, like I said, kids teach us more than we teach them. So as we started learning, and we were looking at the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that was done 20 years ago, actually, but basically it was showing how trauma affects the long-term health impacts of childhood trauma, and the impacts on the brain development, as well as long-term health in diabetes, heart issues, there's a whole bunch of things in that. So that's where it kind of started for me. At the time, of course, I had been a few years already into my own recovery, 12-step work. So this kind of fit in with that.
Yeah.
And just I think it's been so stigmatized, mental health, and acknowledging it. Kids were just saying about this, it's not a joke. That was their motto. Mental health is not a joke. Because, in our community, there had been quite a few suicides over in those early years. And so that kind of got them on to doing this work. And they spent a whole year, that first year, and they've been doing the same work, keep the research they did ever since. It's not all they do, but that's been a huge part of their work in the last 4 or 5 years. It was convincing me, and okay, we need to learn how to deal with trauma, and help, not just students, but and there was one of the studies that I'd come across, 90% identified as high stress level in their jobs, and this is before COVID, of course. So, and as well, that same number was this for those same teachers that didn't do anything to help or deal with it. 93% weren't dealing with it.
I know that you've also, not only are you teaching in a high school right now, just as a way to kind of have your hands into the things that you've learned and put those into practice, but you also, was it for about 10 years that you worked with Enlace?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
Sure. Because in those early days of teaching, the first couple of years, I don't know, I don't know if it happens to other people, but I just got a glimpse of that I was part of an organization like that, going around to different schools. And, at the time I didn't, I don't know what that meant, but that's eventually what I ended up doing. Nonprofit, Enlace is a nonprofit organization, educational program that stands for Engaging Latinos in Communities for Education. And, we started this Hispanic student dropout study in 1999 that my mentor, Dr. Chavez, was part of that study. And so it's basically to help fill the gap, opportunity for students college preparation, help students have have information and exposing them to the campus and learn how to, like, you can do this, you belong here. So, and I would, we had I helped build and develop new classes in different schools, and from high school, middle school, and eventually into elementary. So it was an awesome experience.
And you also had like you would bring some of them on field trips, is that right? To like
Yeah.
Los Angeles? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, our offices were at the university here at New Mexico State University, eventually moved to a community college. So, we'd bring every fall and spring, we'd bring kids to the campus here, which is great and all, but I was like, well, it'd be nice if we could expose them to other colleges. Not that we don't want them here. It's like there's other options outside of so let's, so we started a short trip to UNM in Albuquerque, and then our first big excursion was to which we took them to U of A in Tucson, and then ASU in Phoenix. And so that was the first year we went out of state. And then the next, California, we took them to UCLA, USC, and Cal State Northridge, and UC Santa Barbara. And then the following year we got down to San Diego. And so what's the name of that college down there? Is that you? That's not USC.
It's a UC. I think it's UC San Diego.
San Diego.
Yeah. Okay. It's beautiful, right on the ocean.
Yeah, it is. It's an awesome campus. Yeah. And then we drove up to LA after that day, and saw those I mentioned earlier, I think. But yeah, I mean, that was, many of our students had never left here.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, we had a few that colleges right out of high school. Most of them, because our state has the lottery scholarship, so that pays for your tuition. From freshman on for 3.5 years. They don't pay it doesn't pay the first semester. Many students stay in state for that reason.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that makes sense.
And we would have gone this year, but COVID happened. I was getting ready to go to Dallas and Austin and see colleges there. That didn't happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of plans that had to change, especially with schools. Well, as we're on that topic, let's talk about that. So what are some things that you would like for teachers that might be listening, or students or parents of students, to know from your expertise about going into this fall semester and the way it's going to look? What are some important things for people to know?
Well, I'm as confused, I think, as most other families and parents are. I think teachers are not sure yet what to expect. We're starting on Monday, and all I know is we're going online, and that's, it was really crazy in the springtime, and I guess just be patient with us, and be patient with yourselves, and be patient with your kids.
Yeah.
This is a new experience for most of us, and we will get through it. I know that teachers are all the ones I've ever known are really resilient and creative and hardworking, and trust that professionalism. But also trust that their concerns about going back physically, many of have great fears of bringing it to their family and exposing their families, as not just themselves. And we worry about our kids doing the same. So I don't think any teacher I've talked to is comfortable going back physically. Our state is one of the states that's not going to do it. Starting out, we're going to look. I think our governor is going to look at it month by month until we can get the numbers and flatten the curve.
Yeah.
But
You
we've
have
been
some
going up.
you have some stuff that you've learned about like trauma and
Yeah.
teaching. Yeah, why don't you talk about
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, I think, and so that class did a study of their school, our school, and questions just to figure out what were the impacts of trauma. And it didn't surprise us that 75% of our student body had been impacted by some form of childhood trauma. Multiple was the real reality. It wasn't just one.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, you know, that kind of we at least now had the study to show what we already kind of knew, right?
Okay.
And so we built that has informed a classroom that they got designated to be like the student drop-in center for when they're having crises, and so a lot of counseling goes on there. But also, our school has begun to implement classes that replace the old um, uh, advisory period, which really didn't students we didn't do anything. It was like 30 minutes of playing on your phones, right?
Okay. Yeah.
With more conscious effort to deal with the social emotional learning. And if you're not aware of that, it's look up Cassell's social emotional learning and those focus on self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. And I find that's not just for kids. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, the trauma-based teaching is, utilizes that and tries to couch our activities to help develop those things. Um, and, basically it teaches the whole child, it's not just dispensing information, right? It helps to build just connections with kids. A lot of kids that I teach have low self-esteem, so it helps to build that. Helping kids to know how to regulate emotions and notice those deter or disrupt our day, right?
Yeah.
And so also knowing how to manage conflict or difficult experiences in healthy ways, right? So that's some of the things that social emotional learning helps with. Um, and so that falls in line with, some of the practices that's kind of in vogue now with mindfulness, right? In my class, I had a friend of mine that would come in once a month, and she would do meditation with the kids and lead them through a guided meditation, and just to calm ourselves, but we also incorporated other forms of meditation like music, art, you know walking could be forms of meditation, but try to introduce that idea of just being still and getting quiet and to learn how to breathe and calm yourself. So it's not just, theory, it's practice. And at the very least, breathing is the one thing that we can't live without. And it's the simplest thing, but it's the hardest thing just to focus on it.
It is.
So,
Yeah, I love this so much because, it seems to me, and I'm kind of new into the US school system because, we've been overseas for
mm,
so long, and I myself was raised
right.
overseas, and so was my husband. And so,
Mm,
but it seems to me that for the most part in the US public schools, this kind of teaching, this kind of approach is really only for kids who are, on an IEP or something like that. But what you're talking
mm,
about is something that all students should and all teachers could benefit
right.
from.
Well, one of the things about successful, you programs or movements that has been noted is it takes a school-wide approach, or in your case, church-wide or institution-wide approach, maybe district-wide. It's hard to be a small little group to really get off the ground and have without that support, right?
Yeah.
but one of the things, our director, Mr. Martinez, was fully on board with that. So that's something that's been huge and critical. And not a, most of this is new to all of us in the teaching as teachers. I recognized immediately the connections with social emotional learning and the 12 steps and the recovery work that I'd done. And others that I know do that work as well. Well, like, this is the 12 steps. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's good. So talk about that a little bit, because your music is not only songs written by your own introspection and your own experience, but you also have been someone who has shared your music, and you guys as a band have played in like homeless shelters, and you've used it as a way to help the community.
Right.
Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, when I decided I was sick and tired of being sick and tired in September 20th of 2009, I was pretty convinced that there was no way I could play music again, because I attempted several projects. It's like, okay, don't bring that in here when we're playing. Eventually, those things would creep in, which I was struggling with, right? And so I was like, okay, there's no way I'm going to find guys that don't partake, and I'm not judging them. It's just, I was trying to quit, and it just, I wasn't strong enough. I just, in my early addicted mind, it's like, okay, I don't know what to do. Then just say no, and this is not ever going to happen. So I, within a few months of starting my recovery, I sold off a whole bunch of gear that I'd collected. That Raquel, my wife, said, "Don't sell the Les Paul."
Yeah.
So I kept that one. And during those and it was about 3 years that I didn't play. I mean, I had that guitar, and maybe once every 6 months I'd pull it out and then for 5 minutes and then put it back in the case. I didn't play music. And I think I wrote my first song in my mid-20s, but that was never the focus, lyric writing. But during this period, it had to become the focus, because that was the only outlet I had, just being an artist, only creative outlet. So as I was learning the things I was picking up in my recovery work and reading, I had, my brain works. I got to write it down to really lock it in. Even more if I write a song about it. Right. and personalize and apply those things to my life. And so many of the songs that became the album you're referring to was written during my recovery work the first year, and a few consecutive years after that. But yeah, I mean, so that's kind of it basically is kind of a concept album, if you will, from like the beginning to, finding freedom at the end. And using that part of my story to help others. The last song is Testify. Or the first song talks about the devil wouldn't let me go, right? The song's Let Me Go, all right? And then the last song is called Testify, see what God has done. If there's only one reason I'm still alive, it's to testify what God's done in my life, Because for all practicing, statistically, I should be dead,
Yeah, you went through quite a bit, and all of us were overseas. Mom and Dad were, I guess, in Thailand at that point, and I was in Indonesia when you were going through a lot of things, and music saved you. I mean, God saved you, but
yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, it has saved me several times, but music is so connected to my God experiences. It's when I do meet God, and God knows how to speak to me. And he seems to always speak to me in that way. Now, he's used others, definitely, to do that. But that's, in ways that words can't express. I'll just put it that way.
Well, how have you seen your music touch the lives of others, especially like in the spaces where you guys have been, you consider like a ministry?
we're, we haven't been active in the past
Yeah.
year just for issues, conflict and schedules and whatnot. I'm confident we will, but for a good solid 3 years, we were playing once a month at the Gospel Rescue. There's a lot of, similar struggles that I experienced going on there. And so, I would often give my testimony as well, and just connect with those struggles that people are experiencing and going through. So that's the only place I've really seen the impact. If you're saying about like physically seeing it, you know, um, I know we also played in our local Celebrate Recovery meetings here in town at a couple of churches. We would, which is, all our music was basically birthed in Celebrate Recovery. So that's a way to go back and help them out a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, most leaders would say they learn their greatest lessons in hardship, and I think you're definitely one of
mhm,
those. That you've allowed that
mhm,
hardship to compel you with a passion to want to help others in many areas. And yeah, as we're looking at the current situation in the United States, and you're kind of living and working on the border and education, what kind of advice would you have to teachers who are teaching kids who are immigrant kids along the lines of some of this trauma that you were talking about?
yeah.
Especially for teachers who've not really experienced living in another culture. What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, first is if you don't love kids, then find something else to do. Right. Number one. Two is you got to take care of yourself
Yeah.
in order to take care of other
Mm.
people. Just you can see a brand new teacher first year and see them for a couple years down the road and the physical changes, the aging,
Yeah.
right, that it takes. So it's definitely a rigorous, stressful, it's one of the, it's also, I'd say it is up there with the most dangerous
Yeah.
professions in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And not to mention, and that's excluding the whole school shooting thing,
Yeah.
right?
For sure.
I'm not even thinking
Yeah.
about that. I'm just talking about the
Yeah.
workload, right? Then the next thing I would say is learn about your students, where they come from, what conditions do they live in, um, get to know, what they face every day in a reality. You don't, knowing what they go home
Yeah.
to, right, is something that all teachers need to be aware of. Of course, teachers used to go knocking on doors. They don't do that anymore. So it's a little more difficult, but research that. Uh-huh. And then that's just like, the conditions, but then there's also the cultural diversities that our student bodies come with. Like I said, with that multicultural education class, that for me was not just about me, but it was about many of the students that were
Yeah.
there that I was teaching. Embracing that is crucial to connecting with students and making curriculum relevant to them, and to be able to apply that to their lives. So, get educated on cultural competency and cultural responsiveness, right, with teaching.
So we have two questions we're asking everybody in this series. And the first one is, what are some resources that you want to point us to that have been helpful to you? Maybe that's a person,
Mm,
maybe it's an article, a book, a movie, music, or
yeah.
all of the above. What are some resources you would point us to?
So, in thinking about recommendations or references, um, I have to think about those who've made a difference in my own thinking, and played a part in my own transformation, um, and learning how to be in a world of differences and be in a way that's not only respectful, and I don't like to use the word tolerant, but accepting, engaging with that difference. Um, as much as I'll get into in a minute authors I'd recommend, but I first have to credit those folks that I have, just friends and colleagues that have been instrumental in mind transformation, in thinking about learning how to be a social justice worker. My mentor, Dr. Chavez here at NMSU, was instrumental in that. A bunch of other teachers, colleagues as well. My students have been instrumental in that. A couple of authors I'd like to recommend. There are a short list, and there are quite a few, but just a couple would be Gorian Saldua's work. Borderlands Frontera was the first book I picked up that really got me on this path. It helped me helped to me normalize this idea of crossing borders and being bicultural and bilingual, that it was okay, that it was to live in the middle, to live in the in-between, to accept both, that you don't have to reject one and go and prefer another. Work of Bell Hooks, Paulo Freire, Noam Chomsky, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, Rodolfo Acuna, Chicano history in the U.S., Cornel West, Angela Davis, of course, the works of Dr. King, Derek Bell, Gordon Allport, James Cone, who wrote on Black Theology of Liberation, and then more recently, Michelle Alexander's work on the new Jim Crow and her work on racism in the U.S. criminal justice system. More recently, I've been getting into the work of Ibram Kendi, who offers, in my opinion, some of the most brilliant and poignant discussions and illustrations on race and racism in America. I highly recommend his book, Stamped from the Beginning, that chronicles the complete history of race and racism to present. His other book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is just phenomenal. Both of these are essential readings for, in my opinion, anyone wanting to make a difference in the times we're living in today. But I would really like to share, focus next on that. Basically, it's a chapter I've been working on, in a book I've been working on. Who knows when it's going to be published? But this chapter is talking about learning how to die. That looking at ourselves first, and how to change ourselves before we, and try to make differences in our, in our own selves before others. First, it starts with a quote by the band Wilco. It says, "You have to lose. You have to learn how to die if you want to be alive." And then another quote by Alan Redpath. It says, "Before we can pray, Lord, thy kingdom come, we must be willing to pray, my kingdom go." Right? So I can relate a lot with Jonah. God tells him to do something, and Job politely says nope, and hightails it in the opposite direction, thinking he can run away from God, as if that's even possible, right? For those who don't know the story, short version, God asked Jonah to go pray, preach to the Ninevites, who were a godless people, you might say. Jonah has his own prejudice toward these people, thinks God should punish them, so he says, "No, I'm not willing to do that." And so Jonah hops a ship. God creates a storm. The ship's about to go down. The ship captains wake Jonah, who's sleeping in the bottom deck. Jonah sees what's going on, says, "Okay, I know what the cause of this is." So he throws himself overboard to save the people on the ship. God causes a great fish to swallow him up. Jonah's in the belly of the whale or fish for 3 days, where he has his come to Jesus moment, realizes the error of his ways, and so God causes the fish to throw him up, and he goes on and follows God's direction to preach to the Ninevites. So Jesus also refers to Jonah, and for me, the story of Jonah is as much about confronting our own fear and prejudice towards those who are different from us as it is about obeying God. In Jonah, we see a man who lets his own prejudice get between him and God, Jonah's even willing to face God's wrath and suffer the consequences. He even prefers God to take his own life because of his hatred for those people whom he thought God should punish. Right? So another way to look at Jonah's story is that God was sending Jonah to Nineveh because he wanted to teach him something. Maybe get him out of his comfort zone. Right? Maybe help him see others as God sees them. I think this, for me, is one of the many mysteries of Jesus referencing Jonah as the primary metaphor for transformation. You know, the crowds wanted a sign from Jesus, but he says to them, it's an evil, adulterous generation that wants a sign. He says the only sign he will give them is the sign of Jonah. Right? You know, we have to lose. We have to learn how to die before we can be alive. We have to say, my kingdom go, before God's kingdom can come. All right? And we often hear people talk about or praise God for their salvation, right? But it's a much rarer occasion that we hear about how Christ transformed them or resurrected them, right? Or made a difference in their lives. Right?
What about anything, resources along the lines of helping people understand immigrant children and students and what's happening in our nation at this point, so people can be more educated about that?
Wow. Well, a lot of great resources are on websites of your local or state or national ACLU, your civil rights organizations that are in the fight right now, as far as that concerned. I mean, I've frequently ran circles with our local ACLU folks. Was good friends with a couple of them. And they did great work here along the border, and still are. So that's one thing that I've also used in curriculum as well, because they have muscle too, you know.
Yeah.
And their stuff is easy to understand, and they have a resource page with all the issues that you can easily educate yourself with.
That's good.
Yeah.
So the other question we're asking everybody in the series, because when it comes to people who like to make a difference in the world and are wanting to help others, sometimes we can do so much that we don't take care of ourselves. And so I know you talked about that with teachers. Make sure you take care of yourself so you can help others. So the question is, what do you like to do on your day off? Or how do you get rest? How do you like to rest?
Before I answer this question, I want to add for the last question, that there are a lot of smaller social justice organizations that may not be nationwide that are also, just look up your local, they have different themes. I mean, human rights groups, just look up human rights groups in your community. And those are the folks that are on the ground, boots on the ground, just like nurses and doctors are in the hospital. Yeah. They're the ones that I would go to. And I would just, whenever they have meetings or sessions, just attend those and listen.
Yeah.
Right? Go and listen. It's one thing to read about it, but it's one thing to get to know those people who live in the shadows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hearing from actual people.
And right. Because it's not all about what we see on TV. Mm-hmm. That reality is just so far from reality.
Yeah, we're fed a lot in the media these days, even on our phones, and news gets tailor-made to different echo chambers. So I love what you're saying.
And after all, kids are still in cages.
Yeah.
Today, that has dropped from our radar since COVID.
Yep.
But it's still traumatic, to say the least. Yeah. And right under our noses, human rights abuses are happening.
Yeah.
On our watch.
Yeah. And close to where you live and are helping people.
Yep.
So.
Absolutely.
Well, along those
So,
lines, I'd love to hear about how
yeah.
you get some rest because you're doing a
Yeah.
lot
So
here.
the last question, could you repeat it again, please?
Yeah, like when you have a day off, or you have a
Mm,
chance to rest, how do you rest? What does that look like for you?
well, usually music
Yeah.
is my go-to thing. I'll come over here and play a couple hours. I don't. I mean, that's the way I decompress and get out of my head. You know, time stands still when I do that, so it's a form of meditation, like I said
Yeah.
earlier. But I think my first go-to is just hanging out with my wife. Watching TV together, just hanging out with her. She helps me keeps me grounded, and she's also was a former teacher, and just really resourceful, as well. But I'll whenever I have a day off, I usually go try to hang out with mom and dad, but try to do that once a week. Those are things I have to do. Um, I'm pretty routine. I'm pretty structured.
Yeah.
You know, I don't. We're pretty boring, I guess, if you just look at it. But it works
No,
for
it's
me.
great. I mean, I love that you
I
do
think
music and
my
relationships. Those are both very good.
my life was really complicated for a long
Yeah.
time, and I think the simplistic those things are just what
Yeah.
matters. Everything else can just you know you know just focus on what matters. you know Soul work, if you will,
Yeah.
what feeds your soul. um, I find myself doing that more and more these days.
That's good. Yeah. You spent some time in New York City, which about as busy as you could possibly be. And then
Hmm.
I remember when you,
Yeah.
after you were studying at Columbia on your doctorate early on, and then when you got back to New Mexico, just such a different pace and started to get healthier in that way. Just the pace can be really tough. So,
Yeah, and it did take a while,
yeah.
even when I moved back
Yeah.
here. But that was adjusting post divorce, working through that PTSD,
Yeah, exactly.
which I didn't know what it was at the time,
Yeah.
right?
But it is a trauma.
So
It's a grief. Yeah.
yeah, and if you don't work through those, right, they will destroy you.
Yep. Well, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the work that you do. I'm proud that you have not only worked on yourself, and worked through your, difficulties in life and all that, but also that you're helping other people work through theirs in some really hands-on ways. Even
Yeah,
learning how to help others as well. So thank you for,
yeah, and just from my step work, that's the 13th step, is taking that message to other people. Every
yeah,
time I get a chance to share that with somebody, it helps me. So thank you for giving me the opportunity,
of course.
um, to share a little bit of what I know. I hope it was useful and beneficial.
It was. You're an inspiration. Keep up the good work.
Thank
Love
you.
you.
You too. Love you. Proud of you.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
I want to say a very special thank you to my big brother, Dr. Christopher Adams, and his just everything that he does and all that who he is and the way he just pours himself into all kinds of areas in his community and life. And those of us who get to be family with him, it's just a huge blessing. And I know that those who have been his students and colleagues and professors and so many people have been blessed by his life. So I'm so grateful he agreed to be on this show, on this second episode of the Make a World of Difference podcast. I know that you've been inspired to make a difference in new ways because of things that he shared. And hopefully these things that he shared will kind of spur some new conversations that you are having with your own family, your own spouses and kids and parents and siblings and friends, coworkers, neighbors, people in your communities of faith. These kind of conversations are just really important right now. How can we make a difference with our lives with the time we have left? If there's anything that COVID has taught us, it's that life is really short. And my husband had a friend who living in London, and you just saw her a couple years ago, and she put on Facebook, day 3, she had COVID and was just not feeling well. And on day 5, she had already passed away. She didn't even make it to the hospital. It was just a real wake-up call for us that, wow, we just want to live each day knowing that we are making a difference in the lives of others. We don't know how much time we have left. And so for me, this is great that I get to interview my family members. I can't see them right now. I haven't seen my older brother and my parents physically in a really long time because they're in New Mexico and I'm in California. I finally moved to be in the same country with them, and we can't see each other. If I went to New Mexico right now, I'd be quarantining because I'm in California, and that's just how it is for us Californians these days. But anyway, just to put that out there, have the conversations with your family and your friends that you want to have. We don't want to have any regrets from this time. We don't know how much time we have left. We don't know how much our loved ones have left, but we know that we can choose to control how we make a difference in this time. So I would encourage you to have these conversations and just to, like I said before, research some opportunities in your own family and neighborhood and city and state and nation about ways that you are passionate about making a difference, ways that you really could change the lives of others for the better, and not just living for ourselves. It's oddly enough, when we're down and we're struggling and we can't find hope, we can find hope when we reach out to someone else and offer just a helping hand. There's something that it does in us and in them, because we were made for connection and relationship. It's part of what separates humans from all other living things, and we do that in such different ways. It was one of the really awesome things I learned as an undergrad studying sociology, just the way we interact in society with each other. We need each other. We need each other to have success. We need each other to have hope, and part of that just starts with us being the first one to just reach out and to make that first step. So I encourage you guys this week, based on things you've heard, some of these resources that Chris has pointed us to, maybe even just listening to his music will inspire you. And so I just encourage you to take a next step this week. What's one thing that you could do differently coming up this next week to just make a difference in someone's life? And just start small, and then you'll see how it can grow and just be contagious with other people. Contagious hope, contagious joy, all around. I look forward to hearing your stories. I love to hear them. And if you would be open to sharing them, sharing photos and hashtagging World of Difference, I'll just check that out, and all of us will check that out and just see how you're making a difference wherever you are in the world, wherever you're listening. Tune in next week, because I am going to interview my mom, and I know that she has lots of fans around the world, because even after she left living in Thailand, I would run into some of her friends that she knew in Chiang Mai, Thailand, where she lived for a few years when I was living in Singapore still. And I would run into people at Grace International School that would say, hey, tell your mom to come back here. We love her. We miss her. She made such a difference in the lives of the students and the families. So, and I know for sure she's making a difference where she is in New Mexico, because I've seen it myself and watched her on TV and news channels before she retired, when she was doing the work she was doing. So you are not going to want to miss Frida Adams next week. Please stop back by this podcast and tune into that, whether you're driving to the grocery store in your car or just listening at your house, or I don't know, maybe you're one of those people right now that has the luxury of being by a beach or by the pool or in the mountains on vacation somewhere on holiday. Wherever you are, tune in to hear Frida Adams talk about her amazing life and the ways that she's pouring her life out for others. You will not want to miss it. Bye, guys. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.